Okay, so you've been thinking about the 2024 election
Yeah,
and what a Kamala Harris presidency could look like.
right.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
It is.
We're diving into that today.
Yeah,
The potential shifts in domestic and foreign policy,
yeah,
the economic ripples,
yeah.
and what a first like this could mean for the U.S.
It's smart to game out these scenarios,
Right.
even if things shake out differently,
Yeah,
Thinking through the what if
sure.
helps us understand how different political choices can have a domino effect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like holding up a crystal ball.
Right.
But instead of vague shapes, we're trying to see the potential consequences.
Yeah.
Let's start with what's probably top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Domestic policy,
Yeah.
healthcare education, criminal justice.
Sure.
Those big issues that hit home for everyone.
Absolutely, those bread and butter concerns.
Right.
Now, if Harris wins, we could see a real push for social and economic reform.
Okay.
Take healthcare, for instance.
Yeah.
You've mentioned being concerned about healthcare costs.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it's no secret that Harris is a proponent of the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
We could see her administration pushing to expand subsidies,
Okay.
maybe even create a public option to compete with private insurance.
That would be a big change, especially for families struggling with those monthly premiums.
Right,
But how would that work alongside talk of Medicare for all?
right.
I remember that being a big topic during the primaries.
Right, and it highlights the political tightrope any president faces.
Yeah.
While Harris has voiced support for more universal healthcare systems,
Mhm.
actually pushing that through Congress,
Yep.
especially if it remains divided,
Right.
would be a monumental challenge.
I bet.
There'd be pushback from insurance companies, concerns about costs, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. It's
It's a lot.
It's fascinating how, even with the best intentions, navigating the political reality is like walking a tightrope.
It is.
Speaking of tightropes, let's talk education. You're passionate about social mobility,
Yeah.
and Harris has talked about big ideas like student loan forgiveness
Right.
and pumping more money into public schools and childcare.
Sure.
Those seem right up your alley.
They are, and it's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
Think about the potential impact of something like widespread student loan forgiveness. On one hand, it could be a game changer for millions, freeing them from that debt burden.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
Right.
there are legitimate concerns about the cost of such a program
Okay.
and whether it truly addresses the root causes of rising tuition costs.
It's like every solution comes with its own set of questions.
It really does.
Would forgiving debt today just mean we end up in the same place tomorrow?
Yeah.
And how do you even begin to tackle a problem as big as the rising cost of college?
Those are billion-dollar questions,
Right.
and there are no easy answers.
Wow.
Some experts argue for more focus on making college more affordable in the first place,
Yeah.
while others say we need to invest heavily in vocational training and apprenticeship programs to provide alternative pathways to good-paying jobs.
Okay.
It's a complex issue with no silver bullet solution.
Makes you realize just how tough these decisions are.
Yeah.
Okay, before we shift gears to foreign policy, we have to touch on criminal justice.
Sure.
Given Harris's background as both a prosecutor and as someone who's called for reforms,
Right.
how do you see her approach to criminal justice evolving if she becomes president?
It's a fascinating question, and I think we'd see her trying to bridge those two worlds.
Okay, how so?
Imagine her pushing for a multi-pronged approach, investing in rehabilitation programs to break the cycle of recidivism,
Okay.
tackling systemic racism within the justice system,
Yeah.
but also addressing public safety concerns, which are often at the forefront of voters' minds.
It's like she'd be holding these two opposing forces.
Right.
The need for change and the realities of law and order.
Exactly.
How do you balance those competing demands?
Exactly. And it gets at the heart of what we've been talking about.
Okay.
Governing is about navigating these tensions, finding a way to honor your ideals, while also grappling with the practicalities of politics.
It's that push and pull that makes this whole thought experiment so compelling, right?
It really does.
Trying to predict not just the policies, but how a president's own background shapes their choices.
Precisely.
Wow.
It's about understanding the nuances, the competing interests, and the constant need to find that elusive balance.
Yeah.
It's what makes analyzing potential presidencies so fascinating. And you can't separate domestic issues from how the U.S. interacts with the rest of the world.
Right.
Those domestic policies we've been discussing,
Yeah.
they often have ripple effects on the global stage.
You're right. It's all connected.
Yeah.
So let's talk foreign policy.
Okay.
You're big on global cooperation.
I am.
And I'm curious how a potential Harris presidency might shift America's relationships with other countries,
Okay.
especially those key alliances.
That's where her experience as vice president working alongside Biden on the world stage becomes really relevant.
Right.
She'd likely continue many of the current administration's strategies, particularly when it comes to those big players like China and Russia. We're talking about maintaining a firm stance on trade, human rights, those crucial issues.
So a certain level of continuity, but with the potential for Harris to put her own stamp on things.
Exactly. She might bring a more assertive style to diplomacy,
Okay.
a firmer hand at the negotiating table.
Interesting.
It would be fascinating to see how that plays out in those high-stakes situations.
It definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this thought experiment.
For sure.
And speaking of global cooperation, you're passionate about climate change.
Right.
How do you see a potential Harris presidency impacting those crucial alliances within NATO and the UN,
Okay.
especially when it comes to tackling this global challenge?
It's an area where she could really make a mark.
Okay.
She's spoken passionately about climate change in the past.
Right.
And a presidency could give her the platform to turn those words into action.
Yeah.
I could see her leveraging relationships within NATO and the UN, using her position to push for more aggressive targets.
Okay.
Maybe even tying climate action to economic incentives or penalties.
That sounds like a proactive approach, using those international partnerships to drive change.
It is.
And while we're on the topic of global issues, what about immigration?
Sure.
It's such a complex and often contentious topic.
It is.
How do you see Harris navigating this, especially when it comes to the U.S.-Mexico border?
It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
Right.
She'll be under pressure from all sides.
I imagine so.
Some will demand stricter border security measures, while others will advocate for more humane treatment of migrants.
It's like trying to find that balance between competing priorities,
Yeah.
the need for security and the responsibility to treat people humanely.
Exactly. We might see her pushing for comprehensive immigration reform,
Okay.
tackling the root causes of migration from Central America,
Right.
addressing the backlog in asylum courts, things like that.
It sounds like a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely.
No easy solutions there.
Not at all.
Which brings up another big question. Even if Harris wants to push for these big, ambitious changes,
Yeah,
can she actually get them through Congress?
that's the question, isn't it?
It seems like bipartisanship is almost a fantasy these days.
You're hitting on a crucial point.
Right.
The political landscape she inherits will play a huge role in what she can actually accomplish.
Okay.
A divided Congress could mean gridlock, forcing her to rely on executive orders or work through the courts to advance her agenda.
It's a reminder that being president isn't just about having a vision.
Right.
It's about having the political savvy to navigate the realities of Washington.
It really is.
And speaking of realities,
Yeah.
how do you think the American public, with all its diverse viewpoints, would respond to a Harris presidency?
That's a fascinating question. Her presidency would undoubtedly energize certain segments of the population.
Okay, like who?
Think about the historical significance.
Okay.
The first female president, the first Black woman president, the first Asian American president.
Wow.
That representation would be hugely meaningful for so many.
It's hard to overstate the impact of breaking those barriers, especially for younger generations, seeing themselves reflected in the Oval Office for the first time.
Absolutely. But it's important to acknowledge that not everyone would be celebrating.
Oh, right, of course.
There would be those who push back against her policies, who question her experience, or who simply disagree with her vision for the country.
It's a good reminder that even historical firsts don't erase political divides or magically unify the country.
Exactly. A Harris presidency would unfold within that complex web of social and political realities.
Right.
There would be celebrations, there would be opposition, and everything in between.
Wow.
That's the nature of American politics.
It's a good reminder that we're talking about a real person stepping into a role with immense power, not just a symbol.
Yeah.
Speaking of real-world impacts.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground on policy and politics.
We have.
But what about the economic implications of a potential Harris presidency?
Sure.
I know sustainable growth is something you think a lot about.
It's crucial, and it's an area where Harris's platform aligns with some of your interests.
Okay, how so?
Remember those investments in green energy and infrastructure we discussed?
Yeah.
Those aren't just about combating climate change.
Right.
They're also about creating jobs and boosting the economy in a sustainable way.
Right. It's like that double whammy of positive impact.
Exactly.
Tackling a crisis while also creating economic opportunities.
Right.
And how does that tie into her broader economic goals?
Well, Harris has often spoken about the need to address wealth inequality.
Okay.
So alongside those big infrastructure projects,
Yeah.
you might see a push for policies that specifically support small businesses,
Right.
particularly those owned by women and people of color.
Interesting.
Think access to capital training programs, things like that.
It's about leveling the playing field, giving everyone a shot at the American dream.
Right.
But wouldn't all this spending raise concerns about the national debt?
Of course.
We're already dealing with a lot of red ink.
That's the balancing act, right?
Yeah.
Every decision has potential downsides.
Sure.
Some economists would argue that strategic investments today, even if they increase the debt in the short term, can lead to long-term economic growth that benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Others will point to the risks of inflation or unsustainable spending.
It's never as simple as it seems, is it?
It really isn't.
Every potential benefit comes with a potential drawback.
Right.
And finding that middle ground seems almost impossible.
It highlights the complexity of governing.
It does.
And it's something I hope listeners will take away from this deep dive.
What is it?
It's not about finding easy answers or demonizing one side or the other. It's about understanding the trade-offs, weighing the potential costs and benefits, and engaging in informed discussions about the kind of future we want to build.
Well said. It's a reminder that no matter who occupies the Oval Office, we all have a role to play in shaping the direction of our country.
I agree.
And with that in mind, I always like to end our deep dives with a thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder.
Okay. What's that?
So here it is. How do you think a potential Harris presidency, with all its complexities and potential ripple effects, might impact your life, your community, and the world around you?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Right.
It's not just about what happens in Washington. It's about how those decisions filter down to our daily lives. And that, my friends, is where informed citizenship truly begins.
Beautifully put. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the possibilities of a Harris presidency. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it insightful. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep exploring the world with open minds.